One World Trade Center, New York City. Friday, February 26, 1993. The basement garage was a scene of utter destruction, cloaked in thickening smoke. A woman, alone, trapped and bleeding, called police. There were many panicked calls to the NYPD that day, as real life took on the trappings of a disaster movie.
Terrorist bombings are what happen in other countries, not here in the United States. And yet, in 1993, it happened in New York City. The World Trade Center bombing rattled our notion of domestic security. It shook the foundation of our belief that we're not vulnerable to terrorism. The cracks it caused in our self-confidence can never be repaired. If it happened once, could it happen again? It was the question in everyone's mind, but no one dared to say it aloud. I'm Jim Kellstrom, former director of the FBI's New York office. Somewhere in a crater, 5 stories deep, in wreckage a block wide, lay the key to the bomber's identity. At least, that's what investigators hoped.
At 12:18 p.m. on February 26, 1993, panic and confusion gripped the 110-story World Trade Center Tower 1. People were trapped in elevators. Lights went out. Smoke turned the hallways black. Thousands of the injured and panicked occupants choked as they tried blindly to escape what seemed like a nightmare. The engineer who designed the towers anticipated several potential disasters. He structurally designed them to withstand the violence of a sustained hurricane and something as unimaginable as the impact of a fully fueled jet.
Let's go!
It seemed that something had been overlooked, but no one knew what. On that day, Tower 1 became the city's tallest chimney. The stairwells acted as flues, drawing smoke up from the basement, blackening every floor. In the first chaotic hours, all officials knew for sure was that the cause of the problem was in the basement garage. Neil Herman, supervisor of the Joint Terrorist Task Force at the FBI's New York office, was just blocks away from the Trade Center. Unaware of the cause of the mayhem, the FBI took it upon themselves to respond.
Initially, we felt, and we were told, that it was possibly a fire or transformer. Within a few minutes, it became apparent from the traffic on the police channels that there was something there more than just a fire or some kind of an accident. And I dispatched, along with myself, members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force down to the World Trade Center.
The immediate concern was getting the trapped victims out of the building. Extensive damage created logistical problems for rescue workers. Many of those inside struggled to make their own way to safety. The elevators had broken down, and those on the top floor had to walk down 110 flights. There were tremendous injuries due to smoke inhalation. As hundreds of emergency personnel continued their rescue efforts, FBI agents dispatched to the Trade Center were scouring the area for any indication of what may have caused the devastation. The destruction was massive. The city streets around the complex were buckling. The Vista Hotel, which rests between the two towers, had sustained tremendous amounts of damage. It was immediately apparent to investigators that whatever occurred below the street level was powerful enough to come up through 4 levels of the parking garage, up to the street and higher. Special Agent Chuck Stern of the FBI's counterterrorism branch began the process of organizing the investigation.
It started to look like it might be an explosion, a criminal explosion. I would say maybe within an hour of the blast. And then, of course, more and more information kept coming back. You know, we had our special agent bomb technicians from the FBI were down there and, you know, working with the bomb squad from the city police department, and you know, they were reaching the same conclusion that, you know, this is what it appeared to be.
By early that evening, 200 agents and lab personnel from the explosives unit at FBI headquarters were flown in to assist the hundreds of ATF and NYPD bomb squad technicians already at the scene. Locating survivors and getting them out was the only concern. The rescue effort was largely focused in the garage area. As they slowly made their way through the wreckage, rescue workers were shocked and relieved to find survivors. As they moved onward, they reached an area that had sustained massive destruction. FBI, ATF, and NYPD bomb technicians had suited up in protective gear to aid in the search. Some carried thermal imaging cameras to scan for bodies trapped in the rubble. The discoveries became more gruesome. 6 people had been found dead. Among the dead was John DiGiovanni, a dental supply salesman who had parked his car in the underground lot. Robert Kirkpatrick, William Mako, Stephen Knapp, and Monica Smith were also killed. They'd worked for a company that provided maintenance to the World Trade Center. Monica was pregnant with her first child. Wilfredo Mercado, an employee last seen unloading a van in the garage, was found dead, buried under 12 feet of concrete. Inside the garage was an apocalyptic scene. Debris and concrete were scattered 100 yards in all directions. Hundreds of cars had been demolished, and small fires erupted from spilled gasoline. Pumps drained a flood of water and sewage from broken pipes. Overhead, 6 tons of concrete clung to warped rebars. Fiber optic cables dangled. To FBI agents, there was no way that the cause of this damage was accidental. Special Agent Chris Ronay from the FBI Laboratories Explosives Unit surveyed the damage.
Well, as we analyzed the damage to the building, even in the early stages, it was clear that there was a very large bomb, a very large explosive device of some hundreds of pounds. It was clear from the beginning. We didn't know how big it was. Placed in the basement on one of the parking garage levels, most likely in a vehicle.
If the agent's initial conclusions were correct, this was the single greatest act of terrorism on American soil at that time. The morning after the explosion, interagency teams prepared for their first extended glimpse of the destruction. In addition to the ongoing search for victims, they were now looking for any clue that could explain the explosion. But they were explicitly instructed not to move any evidence. The structural integrity of the lower levels was severely weakened. Any disturbance might cause what little support there was remaining to collapse on those inside. The floor of the B2 level of the garage had collapsed, sending hundreds of cars from 3 parking levels down several stories. All the vehicles came to rest at the bottom level, crushing the tower's refrigeration room.
Actually, the engineers told us that that debris that was piled around the columns, sort of like a soda straw stuck into a pile of sand. And you couldn't remove the debris because that would remove what little support was present and that was holding the Vista Hotel up.
Construction crews spent hours reinforcing the walls and columns in the parking levels so that agents and investigators could safely explore the scene. After several hours, agents and technicians began to make their way into the blast area.
It was very, very eerie because it was deserted and there were a lot of cars with the trunks blown open and things like that. And some of them you could hear ticking because which was kind of an eerie thing at a bomb site, because the turn signals had been activated and were actually still flashing on some of the cars.
Gradually, the searchers got closer to the origin of the blast, known as Ground Zero. The damage was so extensive that there was no conclusive evidence that pointed to the cause of the explosion. The floors were completely blown away, leaving a 5-story crater which extended through the cavity of the building. Investigators searching for explosive residues had difficulty finding them. They were mixed in with concrete debris and building materials. They had to sift through tons of dirt and rubble in the hope of finding some scrap of evidence. Hundreds of damaged vehicles were swabbed and vacuumed in search of residues. Agents persisted. Somewhere in the devastation were answers. As the images of the World Trade Center bombing were broadcast around the nation, people reacted with horror and disbelief. America's innocence had been shattered. The United States joined the list of countries hardened by terrorist attacks. Desperate to catch the bombers, the city placed a bounty on their heads, $200,000, the largest in city history. By Saturday morning, the FBI had set up a command post specifically for this investigation. Every available agent was assigned to the case. They had received hundreds of leads. Most were callers who described suspicious neighbors. Numerous groups had phoned in to claim responsibility. Though most of these leads appeared to be dead ends, they all had to be pursued. Just 2 days after the blast, as agents chased down leads, investigators processing the crime scene spotted a piece of charred, twisted steel at what was thought to be the center of the explosion. It was part of a vehicle decimated by the blast. Perhaps from the vehicle that delivered the bomb.
VIN number here.
Investigators noticed a series of digits stamped onto the metal debris. Though they were explicitly instructed not to remove evidence, they felt their finding was significant enough to override protocol. The metal debris was loaded onto a stretcher and hoisted up to the top of the crater. Once it was on the surface, agents rushed the finding to a forensics laboratory set up by the NYPD Crime Lab. In the lab, agents and examiners were having difficulty determining what the markings meant. An investigator from the FBI's Joint Autocrime Task Force was called to examine the debris.
I think it's 729.
His analysis would provide the first major break of the investigation. He called Special Agent Stern immediately.
He says, "Chuck, I looked at this and I said to the person who was showing it to me, 'My man, you don't know what you have here. This is a confidential vehicle identification number.'"
Confidential VIN numbers are as unique to a particular automobile as fingerprints are to a person. The hidden number allows law enforcement to determine if a particular vehicle has been stolen. It also gives investigators detailed information about the vehicle, including who owns the car. Within 15 minutes, investigators were able to enter the confidential number into the National Crime Information Center computer, which lists all vehicles that have been reported stolen. A response quickly came back. The number belonged to a Ford Econoline van that had been reported stolen from DIB Leasing in Jersey City, New Jersey. The FBI's Newark office was contacted immediately. Within minutes, agents arrived at DIB. The FBI was prepared to uncover everyone or anything that had access to that van.
That this Ford Econoline van was, in fact, a Ryder rental van that had been rented by an individual by the name of Mohammed Salome, and then later reported stolen. And they learned from the management of DIB Leasing that Salome had put down a $400 deposit on the van, and that he had been anxiously trying to get the deposit back.
After conferring with federal prosecutors late into the evening on Wednesday, the decision was made to have an undercover FBI agent in place at DIB when Salome returned for his deposit the next morning. They spent the remainder of the evening piecing together Salome's history. They learned that Mohammed Salome was a 25-year-old immigrant of Palestinian descent. He had come to the attention of authorities as a vocal supporter of Muslim fundamentalist El Said Nosser, whose scathing opposition to the Israeli, Egyptian, and United States governments was no secret. The undercover agent was posing as a Ryder representative, stating to Salome that he needed more information about the theft of the van before refunding the deposit. After some discussion, Salome walked out with the $400. As he stepped out of the office, dozens of FBI agents who had been monitoring their discussion descended upon Salome. Less than 1 week after the bombing, the FBI had a suspect in custody. Salome said little to the agents who questioned him about the bombing. They knew it was probable that he had not acted alone. The investigation was taking on a clearer focus. When Salome was arrested, agents recovered various personal items, including his wallet, which contained several business cards and telephone numbers. They began by searching the address listed on his driver's license. A former roommate told agents that Salome no longer lived at that address. However, they were able to find some belongings of Salome's that he had left behind. There were news clippings and photos relating to Nosser, and a photo of him and Nosser together. There were numerous bank records. There were also more names and numbers for investigators to pursue.
We were able to obtain addresses. We were able to obtain telephone numbers. We were able to have pen registers where we were able to monitor phone calls coming in and going out. And once that started, again, it opened up the floodgates.
Investigators were also receiving help from the public. A few days after Salome's arrest, the manager of the space station storage facility in Jersey City called the FBI. Individuals who rented Unit 4344 had received several deliveries from chemical companies just prior to the Trade Center blast. The manager ordered a key and opened the unit. Inside, he found what he thought to be bomb-making paraphernalia. FBI agents would reach the same conclusion. Inside, investigators found several compounds which could be used for making explosives. Their findings were sent to the FBI lab for analysis. There were also many other leads that emerged from the search of the storage facility. Receipts for the chemicals, bank and phone records, and an unexpected bonus, a log of the suspect's comings and goings. To enter the facility, each tenant was required to punch in their special access code on a keypad located at the entrance. Each time a tenant punched in his number, it was recorded in a computer system. Agents could determine each time Unit 4344 was accessed. Meanwhile, police assembled a lineup. Doug Melvin, manager of the space station, identified Mohammed Salome as the man who rented the locker. He recognized him easily because Salome frequently visited his storage locker. In Melvin's experience, customers usually had no reason to do that. Continuing to search for any possible lead, agents obtained phone records from a payphone just outside the storage facility. One name on the list of individuals who received calls from that phone was already familiar to the FBI. That name was Nidal Ayad. Nidal Ayad's name first appeared on a business card found inside Salome's wallet. Ayad worked as a chemical engineer. Within a week of Salome's arrest, agents learned Ayad had called a chemical company inquiring about buying chemicals. The prospect of another bomb was frighteningly real. It appeared that another act of violence was in the making. Agents felt they had sufficient information to obtain a warrant for Ayad's arrest. On March 10th, the FBI raided his home in New Jersey as he and his family ate dinner. After searching his home, agents quickly made their way to his place of business, Allied Chemical. There they confiscated phone records and bank statements that could tie him to Salome. The most irrefutable link between Ayad and the bomb plot, however, came from Ayad's business computer. It was seized and then thoroughly examined.
Our technical people were able to restore an erased file, which turned out to be a letter claiming credit for the World Trade Center bombing on behalf of an organization known as the Liberation Army 5th Battalion.
A similar letter had been sent to the New York Times 4 days after the explosion. In it, the group called the bombing an act of terrorism to protest American support for Israel. There was also a second letter Ayad hadn't had time to send. It promised another blast. Though the investigation was progressing very quickly, each new discovery revealed the existence of a large and ongoing conspiracy. The potential for more attacks grew more likely every day. As the FBI tried to learn more from their prime suspects in the World Trade Center bombing, Salome and Ayad continued to stonewall their efforts. Analysis of all the confiscated phone records led investigators to an apartment in Jersey City. The landlord who owned the apartment at 40 Pamrapo Avenue confirmed that Salome and another individual rented the apartment from early January of 1993 until the end of February, just 2 months later. The landlord could not confirm the identity of Salome's roommate, whose name he knew only as Rashid. Most likely, that name was an alias. A search warrant was quickly issued. After executing the warrant, agents discovered that 40 Pamrapo Avenue was the bomb factory, the place where the conspirators mixed an explosive powerful enough to rock the World Trade Center. Inside the apartment and an adjacent garage, FBI forensic examiners recovered traces of a diverse range of chemicals. These items were collected and then rushed to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. While agents searched the apartment, the identity of Salome's mysterious roommate emerged. They found papers requesting political asylum in the name of Ramzi Youssef, who, according to the documents, had been detained in September of 1992 at Kennedy Airport for entering the country without a visa. The Pamrapo Avenue apartment was a gold mine for the FBI.
All right, let's go. Go ahead, Casper.
Before they learned of the apartment, the FBI's laboratory examiners could only speculate from residue samples taken at the Trade Center that the bomb used was comprised of the highly explosive compound urea nitrate. The discovery of the bomb factory at Pamrapo Avenue, however, made them certain. From the labs at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., Special Agent Ronay reported the findings.
From the analyses in the laboratory, we concluded that it was made with urea nitrate, a homemade explosive mixture. There's no such commercial product. So they had to mix this themselves. And when we finally located the storehouse or workshop where they did make the bomb, this was confirmed. These materials or remnants of them were available and confirmed that this is what we were indeed seeing in the laboratory in these residues.
Witness interviews and phone record analysis continued, directed mainly at the locations where key elements of the conspiracy had taken place. All of those interviewed mentioned seeing a distinctive-looking individual in the company of Salome and Ramzi Youssef. Phone records helped to identify that individual as Mahmoud Abu Halima. As agents focused their investigation on Abu Halima, they learned that shortly after the bombing, he had fled the country. Abu Halima was well known to authorities through his association with El Said Nosser. Abu Halima was also close to the radical Muslim cleric Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, who would later be sentenced to life in prison for a conspiracy to bomb several New York City landmarks. Soon after agents learned that Abu Halima had fled the country, Egyptian authorities contacted the FBI to say that he'd been arrested and detained in Cairo. Abu Halima had been wanted there for conspiring against Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak. Negotiations between the United States and Egyptian governments were successful. Agents flew to Egypt and took Abu Halima into FBI custody. When he was turned over to FBI agents, his hands were cuffed and his head was entirely covered. He told the FBI that he thought he was being taken out to be shot. Relieved to now be in their custody, he spoke to agents on the flight back to New York.
He did make several statements that were used against him at trial. One of the key things that he said was, about Rashid, who was later determined to be an alias used by Ramzi Youssef.
Abu Halima told Stern that he and Youssef had met in Afghanistan at a secret camp for the Mujahideen Muslim Freedom Fighters, a training ground for international terrorists. At every step of the investigation, Ramzi Youssef's name appeared. He was a known international terrorist and an expert with explosives. Agents now believed he was the mastermind behind the World Trade Center bombing. The FBI began searching for Youssef. They soon learned that he fled the country the night of the Trade Center bombing. An international manhunt for Ramzi Youssef had begun. In the meantime, agents were trying to determine how and when Youssef came to the United States. It's been said that the day Ramzi Youssef arrived on American soil was the day terrorism came to America. On September 1st, 1992, the shadowy Afghan-trained master bomb maker arrived at New York's Kennedy Airport. The FBI's close scrutiny of the passenger manifest from Youssef's flight that day revealed another clue. He had not entered the country alone in September of 1992. With him was Ahmad Ajaj. But Ajaj had been detained by customs agents for producing a false Swedish passport. In Ajaj's suitcase, customs agents found a library of manuals on bomb making and guerrilla warfare. The suitcase was confiscated, and Ajaj was arrested and jailed for passport fraud. To the FBI, Ajaj appeared to be an unlikely conspirator. He had been incarcerated from September of 1992 through the bombing of the Trade Center in February of 1993. Fortunately for agents, prison policy required that all phone conversations be recorded. Ajaj had unwittingly left a trail, and agents quickly followed it.
And we began to see that he was, through various methods, predominantly through three-way calling, where he would call another individual, and then that individual would forward the calls. He was staying in contact with the other conspirators, and was in fact trying to assist them in completing their mission of building this bomb.
Ajaj was questioned by FBI agents about his contacts and his knowledge of the bombing. He said little. His silence was not enough to prevent FBI agents from arresting and charging him in connection with the bombing. With 4 conspirators now in custody, authorities decided to bring them to trial while the search for other bombers continued. In September of 1993, 6 months after the bombing of the World Trade Center, Salome, Ayad, Abu Halima, and Ajaj appeared in federal court in New York City.
By the time that the trial started in September of 1993, we really had to have 2 investigations in one. We had to have an investigation basically continuing to identify those responsible, locate those that were also charged that were fugitives, and also prepare for a 6-month trial that ultimately ended in March of 1994.
By this time, examiners had processed numerous crime scenes. The World Trade Center, the storage facility, and the bomb factory. 70% of the van that delivered the bomb had been collected. There was also a mass of receipts, phone records, and interviews. Tons of evidence had been recovered. It would now be up to a jury to determine if it was enough. By September of 1993, 6 months after the bombing, federal prosecutors were ready to present to a jury how the defendants carried out the bombing of the World Trade Center. The conspiracy began soon after Ramzi Youssef arrived in America in September of 1992. He moved in with Salome, and the two became close friends. The friendship was founded on a mutual hatred of Israel and a desire to disrupt U.S. support of the Israeli government. They chose the World Trade Center as the stage for articulating their political agenda. The World Trade Towers are the city's tallest buildings, rising a quarter-mile above the pavement. In addition to the 2 towers, the complex includes the Vista Hotel, numerous underground shopping areas, and entrances to the subway lines that connect New York and New Jersey. Below that are 5 parking levels, each level containing more offices and businesses. The terrorists decided the bomb could cause the most damage, claim the most lives, by being placed in the garage. The plan was put into effect. Receipts showed that in November, Youssef used an alias to buy chemicals. Throughout the winter, he would order more as he honed the formula for his bomb and worked out the plan of attack.
Where are the exits?
The chemicals were delivered to space station storage. Salome or Youssef would sign for them, using aliases to make sure that no paper trail could lead to them. Youssef was desperate for the bomb-making manuals and Ajaj's confiscated luggage. Youssef developed a clever 3-way calling system to hide the trail from Ajaj's prison phone in New York City to his New Jersey apartment. First, Yosef called a burger stand in Dallas,
How can I
Texas,
get
where his friend Iyad Ishmael worked. Then Ishmael called Ajaj as Yosef waited on the other line.
Get him here. No. Look.
When Ajaj answered the phone in prison,
Everything is
Ishmael connected him with Yosef.
I'm with Ajad. I'm holding for Ajad. Ajad, how are you doing?
Together, the three were able to discuss the bomb's construction.
I don't have the plans.
The jury was methodically being shown the lengths to which the bombers had gone to protect themselves. These bombers would not be deterred. The prosecutors continued. One winter afternoon, the bombers' plot stalled. Salome and Yosef were driving back from Abu Halima's New Jersey home when Salome lost control of his car. He suffered only minor injuries. Yosef was more seriously hurt. He was hospitalized for a week. Yosef made calls to chemical companies from his hospital bed. The FBI learned who he called and when through hospital phone records. As Yosef recuperated, Salome, Ayad, and Abu Halima drove deep into the Pennsylvania woods. Here they tested a prototype of their deadly mixture. It exploded, but it needed more power. So in the coming days, Ayad would attempt to buy compressed hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is so commonly used in Middle Eastern terrorist bombings that it's considered a signature. Even though Ayad worked as a chemical engineer, he had problems finding a company that would sell it to him. On February 16th, the chemist Ayad rented a car to scout the World Trade Center. Salome's fingerprints on the wheel revealed that he drove. His prints were also on the parking ticket for the garage's B2 level. A sketch found later showed Ayad had made a rough drawing of the floor plan. Then, just 4 days before the bombing, at Yosef's request, Iyad Ishmael arrived in New York from Dallas to help complete the bomb making. Ishmael would also drive the vehicle carrying the bomb into the garage. He was Yosef's trusted friend, and he had been a New York City cab driver. Perfect credentials for this delicate operation. On February 23rd, Salome went to DIB Leasing and rented a 10-foot Ford Econoline panel van. He left a cash deposit of $400. Construction of the bomb was nearly complete. There was one more reconnaissance visit to the World Trade Center garage. In a burgundy Chevy Corsica rented by Ayala, with Salome listed as the second driver, the conspirators returned to the garage with Yosef and Ishmael to determine the precise location for placing the bomb. Jurors were shown another garage claim ticket that confirmed the time of the visit, the make of the car, and the garage level they parked on, the B2 level. Meanwhile, Ayad had managed to reach a firm that would sell him compressed hydrogen. He ordered 3 large tanks, which were delivered to the space station storage the next day. On February 25th at the Pamrapo apartment, Abu Halima and the others carefully mixed sulfuric and nitric acid with glycerin into the deadly and volatile substance nitroglycerin. They mixed an estimated 1,200 pounds of urea crystals with several gallons of nitric acid. They poured it into big metal drums where it formed a gel-like mass. They transferred the urea nitrate mass into plastic trash cans. The others had backed the van down the driveway behind the house and up to the apartment door. They packed the cargo hold with their creation, a lethal cocktail of chemicals, bonding agent, fuse, and detonator. They loaded the trash cans and then arranged the home-brewed nitroglycerin among them. They had threaded 4 long fuses through surgical tubing to reduce the smoke and slow the burn enough for the bombers to escape. The fuses were rigged to blasting caps and boxes of gunpowder, and then inserted into each of the nitro containers. All that was missing was the hydrogen, which was used to make the blast even more devastating. In the Ryder van, followed by Ayad's Corsica, they drove to the space station to pick up the hydrogen. They loaded it carefully in the van, propping the 3 red tanks behind the boxes of nitro against the rear doors. Yosef and Ishmael drove the van from New Jersey to a hotel in Manhattan. Hotel records show that Ishmael had reserved a room for the night on February 25th. They parked it out back for the night, hidden from view. At 10 that evening, from his home in Jersey City, Salome informed New Jersey police that the van had been stolen. He spun a story about parking it at a grocery store and coming out to find it gone. Later that night, he met with police to document the loss. He knew he would need a valid police report if he was going to get his deposit back. Agents learned that Salome had purchased a child's airline ticket abroad because it was all he could afford. He needed the van deposit back so he could upgrade the ticket to an adult fare. With the vehicle having been reported stolen, everything was in place. The bombers took their last drive to the World Trade Center. At about 2 minutes past noon the next day, Friday, February 26, 1993, the bombers' Ryder van pulled into the B2 level ramp of the World Trade Center. The burgundy Corsica followed. Ishmael drove the van as Yosef sat in the passenger seat. They pulled the van into a space normally occupied by a New York Port Authority van. Since Port Authority owns the World Trade Center, their vehicles have easy access in and out of the garage. The getaway car waited nearby. One of the men held a cigarette lighter against the fuse. As it began to burn, they rushed to the Corsica and pulled away. The flames raced along, an inch every 2.5 seconds, silent and almost smoke-free because of the surgical tubing. The gunpowder was packed into Atlas Rockmaster blasting caps, the kind used in the demolition of large building sites. 4 fuses were used to guarantee the bomb would detonate. Yosef, Ishmael, and the others exited the garage a few seconds before the blast. At 12:18 p.m., the months of planning this destruction was about to become a reality. The explosion hit the wall of the tower with a massive force, destroying everything around it. Later that day, as rescue workers and investigators were still responding to the scene, Yosef sat safely aboard an airplane to Pakistan, and Ishmael aboard a plane to Jordan. Within days, Abu Halima had also fled. If investigators had not found and tracked the VIN number so quickly, Salome would likely have escaped too. Over the course of the 6-month trial, the jury heard from 206 witnesses and reviewed a total of 10,000 pages of testimony. In February of 1994, a year after the bombing, the trial concluded. It took the jury just 3 days to reach a verdict. The jury forewoman read off 38 pronouncements of guilty: conspiracy, explosive destruction of property, interstate transportation of explosives, and murder. When she finished, the courtroom erupted. Ayad and Salome leapt up, screaming the verdict was an injustice. Only Abu Halima had remained silent. He sat calmly, arms folded, with a bemused smile on his face. 3 months after their convictions, on May 24, 1994, Judge Kevin Duffy sentenced each bomber to a year in prison for each year of life he had deprived the victims. It came to 240 years apiece, with no possibility of parole. Sentencing went on for hours, with each defendant making a lengthy speech. Muhammad Salome, the chemist Nidal Ayad, Ahmed Ajaj, the man who brought the bomb manuals into the country, and Mahmoud Abu Halima, known as the Red, will spend the rest of their lives in prison. Though the trial of the 4 defendants was a success, the mastermind Ramzi Yosef and his accomplice Iyad Ishmael were still fugitives. 4 of the 6 conspirators in the World Trade Center bombing had been convicted. But the FBI still sought the mastermind of the bombing. As the search for Ramzi Yosef and his accomplice Iyad Ishmael continued, agents learned that Yosef was involved in several terrorist plots designed to bring down commercial airliners worldwide. Advisories were issued to American travelers abroad. More terrorist attacks on Americans or American interests were likely following the verdict. Yosef was one of the most dangerous and elusive men in the world.
Subsequent to the World Trade Center incident, it's obvious and apparent that he was planning additional acts of terrorism around the world. The air conspiracy case certainly reveals that the extent of what was being planned, the fact that he was moving around throughout the world, several countries, indicates a wide range of support that he and his compatriots had.
It was not until February of 1995, 2 years after the Trade Center bomb went off, that Ramzi Yosef was apprehended in Pakistan and turned over to FBI agents. Agent Stern was sent to retrieve Yosef and bring him back. Yosef was suddenly willing to talk. His hatred for the United States and its aid to Israel was all-consuming. He told Stern that the World Trade Center was chosen as his target because it was the greatest symbol of American finance and imperialism.
He felt that it was kind of like a state of war. He compared it to the United States atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Where he said 250,000 people were killed, and he felt that if he could topple one of the towers into the other, he would kill that many people, and it was a similar type act.
The final arrest came 6 months later, in June of 1995. Iyad Ishmael was discovered and apprehended in Jordan. He too was returned to the United States to stand trial for his role in the bombing. Yosef and Ishmael were tried together in New York City. In January of 1998, after being found guilty of the same 38 charges that the other defendants had faced, a judge sentenced the two to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The judge, calling Yosef an apostle of evil, ruled that Yosef should serve the remainder of his life in solitary confinement. Only a life of solitude could prevent Yosef from conspiring to kill again. With the major conspirators imprisoned for life, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies have had a chance to reflect on the magnitude of this investigation.
Well, the World Trade Center case really, in many ways, was a real wake-up call for law enforcement. It was the largest single act of international terrorism in the country. And although terrorism has been here for many years, certainly on the scope that we saw the World Trade Center was something that was unique and certainly much more horrific than we've seen in the past.
The bombers did $550 million worth of destruction to the World Trade Center. The financial damage caused by the disruption of national and international business was also deeply felt. America had been jolted from its belief that international terrorist attacks don't happen on American soil. By bringing such a complex and far-reaching conspiracy to a close so quickly, the FBI sent a message around the world. The taking of innocent lives will never be tolerated.